Hello, and welcome to another quiet journey through the pages of the past. Tonight, we step away from the noise of the world and into a time long ago, where candlelight flickers on wooden beams, ink flows slowly across parchment, and the mind wanders freely through fields of thought. You may have heard the name Leonardo da Vinci before, perhaps whispered in museums, mentioned in classrooms, or painted across the pages of history books. But tonight, we won't be diving into lectures or facts. Instead, we'll be walking beside him, not just as a genius, but as a man who lived with curiosity, care, and quiet wonder. From the hills of Tuscany to the grand halls of Milan and beyond, his life was filled with small moments that quietly shaped the world. Before we begin, if you feel comfortable, please do like this video and subscribe to Bedtime Historia, so more of us can gather here, under the soft light of history, night after night. And if you'd like, leave a gentle comment below saying where you are right now, and what time it is in your corner of the world, just a simple note to remind us that even though we're far apart, we're sharing this moment together. Now, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders relax. If you haven't already, dim the lights, turn off your phone, find a comfortable position, maybe lying back with your hands resting softly at your sides. This is your time. Your space. And for the next hour or so, let me guide you gently into the life of a man who saw beauty in everything, Leonardo da Vinci. So without further ado, let's begin. Part 1. The Quiet Beginnings, a Childhood Among the Hills of Vinci. You are now stepping into the very first chapter of Leonardo da Vinci's life, a time when he was not yet known to the world, not yet a painter, an inventor, or a thinker of great renown. He was simply a child, barefoot and curious, running through the soft hills of Tuscany where the sun touched everything with gold. Let us imagine together. Perhaps you can picture it too, a small village nestled among olive trees and vineyards, where the wind carries the scent of wild thyme and rosemary. This is Vinci, a quiet place tucked away in the heart of Italy during the 15th century. The year is 1452, and the world around us is still young. There are no clocks ticking loudly in every room, no bright lights flashing from screens, only the rhythm of nature, the rising and setting of the sun, and the gentle sounds of life unfolding slowly, as if there were all the time in the world. It is here, in this peaceful corner of the world, that Leonardo was born, not in a palace, not in a bustling city, but in a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of the village. His home was made of stone and wood, its walls thick enough to keep out the winter chill, its windows small so that the candlelight inside would glow warmly against the dark outside night. His father, Ser Piero, was a respected notary, a man who carried his importance lightly, often seen walking through town with a leather-bound book tucked under his arm. His mother, Caterina, was a woman whose presence brought warmth wherever she went, though her role in Leonardo's early life remained somewhat uncertain. What we do know is that the boy grew up surrounded by a large family, uncles, cousins, half-siblings, all living close by, their voices filling the house with laughter, stories, and the occasional hushed argument over supper. There were no school bells ringing in the morning, no strict lessons written on chalkboards. Instead, Leonardo learned by watching, by touching, by feeling. He watched how birds moved through the air, how light danced across the surface of water, how shadows stretched long in the late afternoon. He listened to the rustling of leaves in the wind, the chirping of crickets at dusk, the distant sound of church bells calling the faithful to prayer. He spent much of his time outdoors, climbing trees, chasing butterflies, collecting stones and feathers, sketching shapes in the dirt with a stick. The world was his classroom, and he was a student with endless curiosity. He didn't just look at things, he studied them. He wondered about their purpose, their structure, their movement. Even as a child, he had a way of seeing that others did not. The hills around Vinci were covered in wildflowers in spring, and in summer they turned golden with dry grass. In autumn, the leaves fell softly, drifting like whispers to the ground. Winter came quietly, bringing with it frost-covered mornings and the smell of wood smoke curling from chimney stacks. Each season brought its own beauty, its own rhythm, and Leonardo absorbed it all like ink soaking into paper. In the evenings, the family gathered around a fire, its flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Bread was broken, soup was shared, and stories were told. Sometimes, someone would play a lute, the notes soft and slow, like a lullaby for the whole household. Leonardo would sit quietly, eyes wide, listening to tales of knights and dragons, of saints and miracles, of faraway lands that seemed both real and imagined. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried weight. He asked questions that surprised even the adults. Why does the sky turn red at sunset, or how does a bird stay in the air without falling? These were not idle musings, they were the beginnings of a mind that would one day change the course of history. But for now, he was simply a boy with paint-stained fingers and dreams too big to be contained within the borders of his village. And though he didn't know it then, these early years, filled with wonder, silence, and the steady pulse of rural life, would shape the man he would become. Can you imagine what it must have been like to grow up in such a place? To wake each morning not to the buzz of technology, but to the soft cooing of pigeons outside your window? To fall asleep not with glowing screens illuminating your ceiling, but with the moonlight streaming through wooden shutters? Leonardo's childhood was not perfect, of course, no life ever is. But it was full of peace, full of space for thought, full of moments that allowed him to dream deeply and without interruption. It was a foundation built not of marble or stone, but of quiet, observation, and love. And perhaps, dear listener, that is something we can all learn from. Perhaps the most important discoveries about ourselves, about the world, about the people around us, come not in moments of noise and chaos, but in those rare, precious times when we are simply still. So let us rest here for a while longer, in the gentle embrace of Vinci, before we move forward into the next chapter of Leonardo's journey. Let us take a deep breath, feel the cool Tuscan air, hear the distant call of a shepherd guiding his flock down the hillside, and allow ourselves to be present in this moment. Because sometimes, the best way to understand someone's story is to start at the beginning, to see where they came from, to walk the same paths they once walked, to breathe the same air they once breathed. And so, my friend, as we gently leave behind the hills of Vinci and begin to make our way toward Florence, the city where Leonardo would take his first steps into the wider world, I invite you to take another slow breath, to settle deeper into this story, and to let yourself be carried forward with me as we continue exploring the entire life of Leonardo da Vinci. As the seasons passed and the years unfolded gently over the hills of Vinci, Leonardo grew taller, his limbs no longer so thin, his steps more confident as he wandered through the fields and forests that surrounded his home. He was still a quiet boy, but now there was something else in his eyes, a spark, a curiosity that could not be ignored. He began to draw more often, using whatever tools he could find. Charcoal from the fireplace became his pencil, rough pieces of wood or stone his canvas. He was still a quiet boy, but now there was something else in his eyes, a spark, a curiosity that could not be ignored. He began to draw more often, using whatever tools he could find. Charcoal from the fireplace became his pencil, rough pieces of wood or stone his canvas. He would sit for hours sketching birds in flight, leaves curling in the wind, the way light fell across the surface of a pond. His hands were never idle, always moving, always searching, always trying to capture the world around him in lines and shapes. There were no formal lessons in art, no master standing beside him to guide his strokes. But what he lacked in instruction, he made up for in observation. He watched how the muscles of a horse tensed when it ran, how water rippled when a stone was dropped into it, how shadows stretched long at dusk. Each small detail mattered to him, and each one found its way into his drawings. Sometimes, he would follow the shepherds as they moved their flocks across the countryside, asking them questions about the animals, their habits, their behavior. Other times, he would sit alone by the riverbank, watching the fish dart beneath the surface, wondering how they moved so effortlessly through the water. It wasn't just nature that fascinated him, it was movement itself. How things flowed, how they changed, how they responded to forces unseen. Even then, before he had ever heard the word science, he was already thinking like one. The village elders often saw him wandering with a notebook tucked under his arm, filled with sketches and notes written in his curious backward script, a habit he developed early on, perhaps out of privacy, perhaps out of instinct. It was as if he were writing for himself alone, recording thoughts too delicate to share with anyone else. His notebooks became a kind of diary, not of emotions or dreams, but of the world as he saw it. He wrote about clouds, about birds, about the patterns of water. He asked questions no one else seemed to think of. Why does hair curl? How does a bird lift itself into the air? What makes thunder echo through the sky? These were not idle questions. They were the seeds of ideas that would later grow into inventions, theories, and works of genius. But here, in Vinci, they were simply the musings of a boy who looked at the world with wonder. The people of Vinci loved him, though they did not always understand him. Some called him strange, others said he had been born with a mind too large for his small body. But none could deny his kindness, his gentle manner, or his deep respect for all living things. He never hunted, even when others did. He refused to harm animals unless it was necessary for survival. There are stories, some true, some perhaps imagined, that he once bought caged birds just to set them free, watching them soar away into the sky with a quiet smile on his face. In the evenings, after supper was done and the dishes washed, he would sometimes sit outside with his father, looking up at the stars. Ser Piero would point out constellations, telling stories of ancient myths and legends, while Leonardo listened quietly, his eyes tracing the patterns in the sky. He didn't ask many questions during those moments, just sat there, letting the silence settle between them like a warm blanket. And yet, inside his head, the questions were always there, waiting patiently for the right time to emerge. One evening, as they sat together under a sky painted with soft hues of lavender and gold, Leonardo turned to his father and asked, "Do you think the stars are alive?" Ser Piero chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't know, my son. Maybe they are. Or maybe they're just lights in the sky." Leonardo nodded thoughtfully, not disappointed by the answer, only inspired by the mystery. To him, everything was alive in its own way, the trees, the wind, the rivers, the stones. Even the stars. This belief, that life existed in every form, in every motion, stayed with him throughout his life. It shaped the way he drew, the way he studied the human body, the way he saw the world. He did not separate science from art, nor nature from invention. To him, they were all part of the same great puzzle, and he was merely a humble observer trying to make sense of it. As he grew older, the world around him began to change. Trade routes brought new ideas and goods to nearby towns. Travelers passed through Vinci, bringing with them stories from faraway places, of cities filled with towering cathedrals, of artists painting miracles onto canvas, of scholars uncovering secrets hidden in ancient books. Leonardo listened to these stories with wide eyes, his heart quietly stirring with longing. He knew, even then, that Vinci was only the beginning. That one day, he would leave this place behind and step into a world much larger than the hills he had always known. But for now, he remained where he was, a boy among the olive trees, a dreamer among the stars, a soul learning to see beauty in the smallest details of life. And perhaps, dear listener, that is why we begin here, because to truly understand someone, we must first understand where they came from. We must walk the same paths they walked, breathe the same air they breathed, feel the same quiet stirrings of curiosity that once lived inside them. So take another breath. Let your body relax. Let your thoughts drift like clouds across the sky. And if sleep begins to pull at your eyelids, if your mind starts to wander into dreams, then go gently. Carry with you the hills of Vinci, the whispering wind, the soft rustle of leaves beneath young feet. Because even as we prepare to leave this place behind and journey onward, toward Florence, toward the city that will shape the man Leonardo is destined to become, we can still feel the warmth of his childhood lingering in the air, like the last rays of sunlight stretching across the horizon. Part 2, Florence, the first steps into a world of art and wonder. Now, my friend, as we gently leave behind the quiet hills of Vinci, we begin our journey toward a place filled with color, sound, and movement, a city that hums with life and creativity. We are heading to Florence. Imagine it with me, a city waking up beneath the morning light, its red-tiled rooftops glowing softly in the golden hour. The streets are narrow and winding, lined with tall stone buildings whose walls have stood for centuries. The air carries the scent of fresh bread baking in small shops, the faint aroma of oil paints drifting from open windows, and the distant ringing of church bells calling out the time. Florence in the late 1400s is not just any city, it is the heart of the Renaissance, a place where art, science, and philosophy are flourishing like spring flowers after a long winter. It is here that Leonardo da Vinci will take his first steps into the world beyond his village, and where he will begin to shape the man he is becoming. He arrives as a teenager, no longer a boy but not yet a man. His clothes are simple, his hands still calloused from years of drawing on rough wood and sketching in the dirt. He walks through the city's gates with a small bag slung over his shoulder, filled with a few belongings and the quiet hope that this new chapter will bring him closer to understanding the world. The streets are alive with people, merchants setting up their stalls, artists painting signs above shop doors, children chasing each other between carts full of fruit and fabric. There is a rhythm to the city, a steady pulse that beats beneath the chatter and clatter of daily life. Leonardo moves slowly, taking it all in. He watches how the sunlight filters through stained glass windows in churches, casting colored patterns onto stone floors. He listens to the music played by street performers, the notes rising and falling like birds in flight. He smells the ink and parchment of scribes copying ancient texts, the rich scent of leather from craftsmen shaping gloves and book covers. But more than anything, he sees the art. Paintings hang in chapels and public squares, their colors vivid even under candlelight. Statues stand tall in courtyards, carved so precisely they seem ready to breathe. Every corner of Florence whispers stories, of saints and scholars, of gods and heroes, of love and loss. It is in this city that Leonardo finds himself at the door of Andrea del Verrocchio, a master painter, sculptor, and goldsmith whose workshop is known across Tuscany. This is where young men come to learn the secrets of creation, to study under someone who can teach them not only how to paint or carve, but how to see the world differently. Leonardo enters the studio with quiet determination. Inside, the space is filled with light streaming through high windows, dust dancing in the beams like tiny stars. The room smells of oil, pigment, and sawdust. There are tables covered in sketches, wooden models of machines, and unfinished paintings leaning against the walls. Verrocchio looks at the boy before him, this curious, thoughtful youth from Vinci, and decides to take him in. Not as a servant, not as an errand boy, but as an apprentice. And so begins Leonardo's formal education in the arts. His days become filled with work, grinding pigments into fine powders, mixing them with oils until the perfect shade is achieved. He learns how to stretch canvas, prepare wooden panels, and apply layers of paint with careful precision. He studies anatomy by observing the human body, not just in life but also in sculpture and drawings left behind by those who came before him. There is no rush in the workshop, only patience, repetition, and attention to detail. Mistakes are expected, even welcomed, because they are part of learning. A brushstroke too heavy can be corrected. A line drawn in the wrong place can be softened. Nothing is ever truly wasted if you are willing to try again. Leonardo works quietly, never boastful, always observant. He watches how Verrocchio blends shadows into light, how he captures the softness of skin or the sharpness of a glance. He copies his master's techniques, then experiments on his own, trying to understand not just how something was done, but why it looked the way it did. One day, Verrocchio asks Leonardo to help with a painting, a scene of Christ being baptized by John the Baptist. Leonardo takes the task without hesitation, choosing to paint one of the angels standing beside the river. When the work is complete, Verrocchio looks at it closely and realizes something remarkable. The angel painted by his young apprentice is more lifelike, more expressive, than anything he has created himself. There are many versions of this story, passed down through time, but what remains true is that this moment marks a turning point. It is said that Verrocchio, seeing the talent in his student, decided never to paint again, knowing that he had been surpassed by someone who had barely begun his journey. But whether the story is fully true or not matters less than what it represents, the beginning of Leonardo finding his own voice, his own vision. He is no longer just a boy from Vinci, nor simply an apprentice in a master's studio. He is becoming an artist in his own right. Outside the workshop, Florence continues to move around him. He walks through its streets, past the towering Duomo, along the Arno River where boats carry goods from faraway lands. He visits libraries filled with books written in Latin and Greek, studying the writings of ancient thinkers whose ideas echo through time. He spends hours watching people, how they walk, how they speak, how their faces change with emotion. He sketches them in the margins of his notebooks, capturing fleeting expressions before they disappear. He writes about light and shadow, about the way water flows, about the structure of bones and muscles hidden beneath the skin. Everything interests him. Everything becomes a subject for study. He does not separate art from science, nor nature from invention. To him, they are all connected, threads in the same great tapestry of life. And though he is surrounded by others who are also learning, creating, and growing, there is something about Leonardo that sets him apart. He is not driven by fame or fortune, nor does he seek approval from those around him. He is simply curious. Always asking questions, always looking deeper, always wanting to understand. As the months pass and the seasons change, Florence becomes more than just a city to him. It becomes a home, a teacher, a mirror reflecting back the possibilities of what he might one day become. And so, dear listener, we pause here, in the middle of this chapter, letting the gentle rhythm of Florence settle into your mind. Let yourself imagine walking those same streets, hearing the same sounds, breathing the same air that once filled Leonardo's lungs. If sleep begins to pull you under, let it do so gently. If your thoughts drift away into dreams, allow them to go. But if you stay awake a little longer, there is more to explore, more to learn about the young man who walked these paths, who listened to these voices, who began to see the world not just as it was, but as it could be. As the days in Florence stretch into weeks, and the weeks into months, Leonardo begins to settle into the rhythm of the city, its pace, its people, its quiet moments hidden between the louder ones. He no longer feels like an outsider peering in, but rather someone who is slowly becoming part of this place that hums with creativity. Each morning, he wakes before the sun rises fully over the rooftops, when the streets are still damp from last night's cool air and the only sound is the occasional call of a rooster or the soft shuffle of footsteps on cobblestone. He dresses quietly, tying his apron around his waist before heading back to Verrocchio's workshop, not with hesitation, but with eager anticipation. Inside, the space feels different in the early light, more peaceful, more open. The dust that floats through the air seems to hang there longer, catching the glow of the rising sun. There is something sacred about these early hours, as if the world has not yet decided what it will become, and everything is still possible. Leonardo spends long hours observing the way light moves across objects, how it bends around corners, how it changes with the time of day, how it can make even the simplest thing feel extraordinary. He sketches endlessly, filling pages with studies of hands, faces, drapery, and architecture. He experiments with shading, trying to capture depth not just with lines, but with the subtle play of shadow and brightness. He learns to mix colors carefully, understanding that each pigment carries its own weight, its own personality. He discovers that blue made from lapis lazuli is rich and deep, while green created from malachite has a certain sharpness to it. He watches how layers of paint can build up, creating a sense of life beneath the surface, as if the image itself were breathing. Verrocchio allows him to take on more responsibility within the studio. He helps prepare canvases, assists in casting small sculptures, and contributes to larger commissions that come from wealthy patrons seeking portraits, religious scenes, or decorative pieces for their homes. Leonardo never complains about the work, whether it is sweeping the floor or grinding minerals into fine powder. He does it all with the same quiet focus. There is no rush in his movements, no eagerness to finish quickly. He takes time to understand every step of the process, knowing that mastery comes not from shortcuts, but from patience and repetition. Outside the workshop, he finds himself drawn to the city's many chapels and cathedrals. He walks slowly through their halls, looking up at the vaulted ceilings painted with stories of saints and angels. He studies the stained glass windows, watching how they filter sunlight into patterns of color that dance across stone floors. One afternoon, he sits alone in the Basilica di San Lorenzo, sketching the columns and arches that surround him. He notes how the light falls differently depending on where he sits, how the shadows shift slightly with each passing moment. He writes in the margins of his sketchbook, thoughts about balance, proportion, harmony, ideas that will later shape his understanding of both art and science. He also visits the marketplace often, where merchants from distant lands sell spices, fabrics, and rare objects brought from faraway places. He listens to their stories, imagining the journeys they have taken, across seas, over mountains, through deserts. He collects small items from them, a seashell, a piece of carved wood, a scrap of silk, each one a reminder that the world is much bigger than the city walls surrounding him. Florence, though beautiful, is not without its struggles. The city is filled with politics, rivalries, and the constant tension between power and artistry. But Leonardo keeps his distance from such matters. He is not interested in wealth or influence, only in learning, in seeing, in understanding. And so, he continues to observe, to draw, to ask questions that others might not think to ask. He wonders why water flows in spirals, why birds tilt their wings when turning mid-air, why human expressions change so subtly with emotion. He fills his notebooks with these musings, writing in his unique backward script, not to hide his thoughts, perhaps, but simply because it feels natural to him. One evening, as he walks home from the studio, the sky is painted with soft hues of orange and purple. He pauses by the Arno River, watching how the water moves gently against the stones. He reaches into his bag, pulls out a small notebook, and begins to sketch, not just the river, but the movement of the current, the way the light reflects off its surface, the ripple of each wave as it touches the shore. It is in moments like this, quiet, undisturbed, full of wonder, that Leonardo truly thrives. He is not chasing greatness, nor is he trying to prove himself. He is simply being present, allowing himself to be moved by the beauty of the world around him. Back at the workshop, Verrocchio begins to notice a change in his apprentice. Where once Leonardo was content to follow instructions, now he asks deeper questions, offers suggestions, and sometimes reworks a detail until it feels right to him. He is no longer just learning, he is beginning to create. There are no grand announcements, no dramatic declarations. It happens slowly, almost imperceptibly, like the first signs of spring after a long winter. But those who spend time with him begin to see it, the spark of something rare, something special. And yet, Leonardo remains humble. He does not boast of his progress, nor does he seek attention. He is simply doing what feels most natural to him, exploring, discovering, and expressing what he sees and feels through his hands. As Florence continues to grow around him, as the city buzzes with new ideas and artistic breakthroughs, Leonardo grows too, not outwardly, but inwardly. He is becoming more confident in his abilities, more sure of his path, more aware of the endless possibilities that lie ahead. But for now, he stays here, in this city that welcomed him, in this workshop that taught him, in this chapter of his life that shaped him into the man he is becoming. Part 3. The Quiet Fire, Growth, Experimentation, and the Seeds of Genius. As Leonardo da Vinci begins to feel more at home in Florence, a quiet fire starts to burn within him, not one that rages or demands attention, but one that glows steadily beneath the surface. It is not ambition in the traditional sense, nor is it driven by fame or fortune. Instead, it is a deepening curiosity, a growing desire to understand not just how things look, but how they work, why they move, and what makes them beautiful. He spends long hours in Verrocchio's workshop, now no longer just an apprentice following instructions, but someone who begins to shape his own path. He studies everything with the same careful intensity, the way light falls across a face, the way water moves around stone, the way muscles stretch and contract beneath skin. There are no sudden breakthroughs, no dramatic moments of genius revealed in a flash. Instead, there is only the slow accumulation of knowledge, the patient gathering of observations, the quiet understanding that comes from years of watching, drawing, and thinking. Leonardo keeps his notebooks close at all times, filling their pages with sketches and notes written in his unique backward script. These books become extensions of his mind, places where he can store questions too big for a single moment, ideas too delicate to be spoken aloud. One evening, as candlelight flickers against the walls of the studio, he sits alone at a wooden table, sketching the hand of a statue he had been studying earlier that day. He draws each finger carefully, noting how the joints bend, how the skin stretches slightly over the knuckles, how even the smallest movement changes its shape. Beside the sketch, he writes, "What is the force that allows this hand to move? What unseen power guides it?" These are not idle thoughts. They are the beginnings of something deeper, something that will follow him throughout his life. He does not yet know that these questions will lead him to study anatomy, mechanics, and flight itself. All he knows is that he wants to understand. Outside the workshop, the city continues its rhythm, merchants calling out their wares, children playing in the streets, musicians strumming soft melodies on lutes and viols. But inside, the world feels quieter, slower, as if time itself has stretched out to allow space for thought. Leonardo often walks through Florence at night, when the streets are less crowded and the air is cooler. He listens to the distant sound of footsteps echoing off stone walls, watches the glow of lanterns swaying gently in the breeze. He passes under archways and through courtyards where statues stand silently, watching the city sleep. Sometimes, he stops by the Arno River and simply looks at the water. He watches how it moves, how it reflects the moonlight, how it carries small pieces of leaves and twigs downstream. He imagines what it would be like to ride upon it, to fly above it, to understand its motion so completely that he could predict every ripple before it formed. He begins to experiment with simple machines, pulleys, levers, gears, trying to understand how they function. He sketches them in his notebooks, labeling each part, writing down his thoughts about how they might be used in real life. He wonders if the same principles that guide the movement of water could also guide the wings of a bird, or perhaps, one day, the wings of a man. No one else seems particularly interested in these ideas. Most people are content with the world as it is, without questioning the forces that hold it together. But Leonardo cannot stop himself. He sees connections everywhere, between art and science, between nature and invention, between the body and the soul. He spends time in the homes of wealthy patrons, painting portraits, studying expressions, learning how to capture not just a likeness, but a feeling. He notices how a slight tilt of the head can change the entire mood of a person, how a subtle smile can reveal both joy and sadness. He paints slowly, deliberately, layering colors to create depth and realism. He experiments with sfumato, a technique that allows him to blend tones and colors seamlessly, creating a softness that mimics the way we actually see the world. This method will later define some of his most famous works, but here, in these early days, it is simply another discovery, another step forward in his journey. He also becomes fascinated with human anatomy. He visits hospitals, speaks with doctors, asks questions about the body's structure, about how bones and muscles work together. He sketches hands, feet, faces, always searching for the truth hidden beneath the surface. There are no formal dissections yet, those will come later, but already, he understands that the human form is not just a subject to be painted, but a mystery to be solved. Every line, every curve, every shadow tells a story, and he wants to read them all. Despite his growing knowledge and skill, Leonardo remains humble. He does not seek praise, nor does he compare himself to others. He is simply doing what feels right to him, learning, observing, creating. And though he does not yet know where this path will lead, he trusts it. He trusts the quiet voice inside him that tells him to keep going, to keep asking, to keep looking. So, my friend, as we pause here in this chapter of Leonardo's life, I invite you to take a deep breath and let yourself rest in this moment. Let your mind wander through the quiet streets of Florence, let your imagination follow the lines of his sketches, and allow yourself to feel the gentle unfolding of a young artist discovering the vastness of his own curiosity. If sleep begins to pull at your eyelids, then go gently. Carry with you the soft glow of candlelight, the steady scratch of charcoal on paper, the quiet hum of a city filled with dreams. Because tomorrow, or another night soon, we will continue forward together, stepping into the next part of Leonardo's journey, where his questions grow deeper, his ideas begin to take shape, and the world around him starts to notice the quiet genius among them. As the seasons continue to turn in Florence, so too does something inside Leonardo, not a sudden change, but a deepening sense of purpose. He no longer sees himself only as an artist, nor simply as a student learning from others. He is beginning to understand that he is also a seeker, someone who looks beyond what is visible and tries to find meaning in what lies beneath. He spends more time with fellow artists, scholars, and thinkers who pass through the city, drawn by its reputation as a center of knowledge and creativity. He listens carefully to their conversations, absorbing ideas about mathematics, geometry, and philosophy. He asks quiet questions, never trying to impress, only to understand. One afternoon, he sits with a group of men discussing the works of Vitruvius, an ancient Roman architect whose writings describe the ideal proportions of the human body. Leonardo listens intently, his fingers tracing invisible lines in the dust on the table before him. Later that evening, he returns to his notebook and begins sketching, not just one figure, but two, overlapping each other within a perfect circle and square. This drawing, which will one day become known as the Vitruvian Man, is not just a study of anatomy. It is a meditation on balance, harmony, and the idea that the human body reflects the structure of the universe itself. To Leonardo, it is not enough to paint people accurately, he wants to understand them completely, to see not only their form, but their place in the great order of things. He continues to explore this idea in his daily life, observing how people move, how they stand, how their expressions shift with emotion. He studies the way light falls across a face at different times of day, how shadows stretch or shrink depending on where the sun is in the sky. He experiments with perspective, trying to create depth not just through technique, but through feeling, making the viewer feel as if they are standing inside the painting, walking through the scene themselves. At night, when the city grows still and the streets empty of foot traffic, Leonardo often finds himself alone in the studio. He lights a single candle and lets its glow guide his hand as he sketches endlessly, sometimes people, sometimes machines, sometimes landscapes imagined rather than remembered. He begins to draw flying machines inspired by the birds he watches circling above Florence. He sketches wings shaped like those of a bat, noting how the bones and membranes work together to catch the wind. He writes about air currents, about lift and resistance, about the possibility of flight not as fantasy, but as science waiting to be discovered. No one else seems particularly interested in these ideas. Most people believe that man was never meant to fly, that such dreams belong only to angels and birds. But Leonardo cannot let go of the thought. He feels certain that there is a logic to flight, a pattern that can be understood if only one looks closely enough. He also becomes fascinated by water, not just how it moves, but how it behaves under pressure, how it shapes the land around it, how it carries objects gently downstream. He sketches spirals and whirlpools, trying to capture the motion of flowing water in a way that feels true to life. These observations will later influence his paintings, in the soft curls of hair, and the folds of fabric caught by a breeze, and the rippling surface of rivers seen in the background of portraits. But for now, they are simply another part of his growing understanding of the world. There are moments when he feels overwhelmed, not by doubt, but by the sheer vastness of what there is to learn. He sometimes closes his notebooks and simply stares into the distance, letting his thoughts drift like clouds across the sky. He knows he cannot know everything, but he also knows that each small discovery adds up to something greater. And so, he keeps going. He walks through the gardens of wealthy patrons, sketching plants and flowers, studying how leaves unfurl and how petals fall gently to the ground. He watches children playing, noticing how their bodies move with ease and grace, how they run without thinking about it, how they laugh freely without hesitation. He writes in his notebook, "Children do not question movement, they simply move. Perhaps we should learn from them." He visits the marketplace again and again, speaking with merchants and craftsmen, asking them about their tools, their materials, their methods. He learns about dyes and pigments, about metals and wood, about how things are made and why some last longer than others. Each conversation teaches him something new, even if it is only a small detail. He collects these details like stones in his pocket, knowing that one day they may fit together into something meaningful. One morning, he stands near the Ponte Vecchio, watching a fisherman cast his net into the Arno River. He studies the arc of the net as it spreads wide in the air before landing softly on the water. He notes how the river resists for a moment before accepting the weight, how the current pulls gently at the edges of the net. Later that day, he sketches the scene in his notebook, adding notes about movement and resistance. He wonders if the same principles might apply to the way a bird lands on water, or how a ship moves through the sea. There is no rush to his discoveries, only patience, observation, and the willingness to ask questions that others might not think to ask. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, Leonardo begins to feel less like a student and more like a thinker in his own right. He still respects his teachers, still values the lessons he has learned, but he also understands that his path is his own. He does not yet know where it will lead, whether he will remain in Florence forever, or whether he will one day leave in search of new places, new ideas, new challenges. But for now, he stays here, allowing himself to grow quietly, steadily, like a tree stretching toward the sky. Part 4, Milan, a court of light and invention. Now, dear listener, we gently leave behind the winding streets of Florence and step into a new chapter, one filled with grandeur, quiet ambition, and the slow unfolding of genius in a city where art and science are not only admired but welcomed as part of daily life. We are entering Milan, a place of elegance and intellect, where dukes rule with grace, artists are honored like scholars, and invention is seen not as fantasy, but as possibility. It is the late 1480s, and Leonardo da Vinci has made the decision to leave Florence behind. He is no longer the boy from Vinci, nor simply an apprentice learning under a master's guidance. He is a man of growing knowledge, curiosity, and vision, and he senses that his next steps must be taken elsewhere. Milan calls to him, not with loud proclamations or promises of fortune, but with quiet invitation. Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, has heard whispers of this Florentine artist who sketches machines as easily as he paints portraits, who asks questions about nature as if it were a language he was trying to learn. Leonardo writes to the Duke, offering his services not just as a painter, but as an inventor, an engineer, a designer of war machines and theatrical wonders. He lists his talents carefully, humbly, yet with confidence, knowing that here, in this court filled with music, architecture, and political intrigue, there may be space for someone like him. And so, with his notebooks tucked safely beneath his arm and the spirit of exploration guiding his steps, Leonardo arrives in Milan, a city unlike any he has known before. The first thing he notices is the size. Milan is larger than Florence, its streets wider, its buildings taller. The air feels different too, cooler, perhaps because of the northern winds, or perhaps because of the more reserved nature of the people who walk its streets. There is still life in the city, still laughter and song, but it carries a different rhythm, a different tone. He finds himself staying in the ducal palace, surrounded by courtiers dressed in fine silks, musicians playing soft melodies in candlelit halls, and scholars debating philosophy over cups of warm wine. It is a world of refinement, where every gesture seems measured, every word chosen with care. Yet despite the formality, Leonardo is welcomed warmly. He is given a studio, tools, assistants, and most importantly, time. Unlike in Florence, where he had been one among many artists striving for recognition, in Milan he is granted space to explore freely, to create without pressure, to follow his ideas wherever they lead. He begins by painting, quietly at first, adjusting to the new environment, learning the faces of those around him. He paints portraits of noble women whose expressions seem both composed and deeply thoughtful, capturing not just their beauty but something quieter, a sense of inner reflection. One of his earliest commissions in Milan is Lady with an Ermine, a portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, the young mistress of Duke Ludovico. In this painting, Leonardo captures movement, the way her head turns slightly, how her fingers gently touch the small white ermine resting in her lap, how light falls softly across her face. It is not just a portrait, it is a moment frozen in time, full of grace and subtle emotion. But while painting continues to be his public face, it is in the private corners of his studio, where charcoal dust floats through the air and pages of his notebooks fill with sketches, that his true passions unfold. He begins designing machines, not just for war, though he does sketch catapults, armored vehicles, and siege towers when asked, but also for peace. He draws water-lifting devices to help farmers irrigate their fields, mechanisms to make construction easier, even designs for stage sets that allow actors to appear and disappear as if by magic. He studies birds again, watching them soar above the rooftops of Milan, noting how their wings tilt and shift with the wind. He sketches flying machines inspired by their movements, filling pages with careful diagrams, notes on air resistance, and ideas about how man might one day glide through the sky like a bird. No one else seems particularly concerned with these dreams. Most people are focused on the present, politics, fashion, music, the affairs of the court. But Leonardo continues to ask his quiet questions, to write down his thoughts, to believe that understanding flight is not impossible, only waiting for the right mind to unlock it. He also becomes fascinated by architecture, not just the design of buildings, but the harmony within them. He studies proportions, the golden ratio, the balance between light and shadow, between structure and open space. He walks through Milan's churches and palaces, sketching arches, domes, columns, always searching for patterns, for order, for beauty hidden in geometry. At night, he often sits alone in his room, surrounded by candles and scattered papers, listening to the distant sound of footsteps echoing through stone corridors. He writes in his notebook, "There is a rhythm to everything, in the movement of water, in the beating of the heart, in the turning of the stars." He does not seek fame, nor does he chase wealth. What drives him is not ambition in the traditional sense, but a deep, unshakable belief that the world is full of secrets waiting to be discovered, and that he is meant to find them. As the years pass in Milan, he becomes a trusted figure in the court, not only for his artistic talent, but for his ability to solve problems, to imagine what others cannot yet see. He is asked to design fountains for palace gardens, to create costumes for elaborate festivals, to advise on engineering projects that will shape the city's future. And yet, despite all this, he remains humble. He does not surround himself with luxury, nor does he try to impress those around him with unnecessary displays of brilliance. Instead, he listens, observes, and creates, slowly, steadily, with the patience of someone who knows that the best things take time. There are moments when he feels the weight of his own expectations, not from others, but from himself. He sometimes closes his notebooks and simply stares out the window, letting his thoughts drift like clouds across the sky. He knows he cannot know everything, but he also knows that each small discovery adds up to something greater. And so, he keeps going. He walks through the city's markets, speaking with craftsmen, learning about materials, techniques, traditions passed down through generations. He visits hospitals, continuing his study of human anatomy, sketching muscles and bones with increasing precision. He watches dancers perform in the courtyards, fascinated by the way their bodies move, how grace can be found in every motion. Each experience feeds into his work, whether in painting, drawing, or invention. Nothing is wasted. Every observation, every conversation, every moment spent watching the world around him becomes part of the vast web of knowledge he is slowly weaving together. And so, my friend, as we pause here in this chapter of Leonardo's journey, I invite you to rest for a moment in the quiet halls of Milan, to feel the cool evening air drifting through open windows, to hear the soft scratch of charcoal on paper as a man sits alone, thinking deeply about the world. If sleep begins to pull at your eyelids now, then go gently. Carry with you the gentle glow of candlelight, the echo of footsteps in stone corridors, the quiet hum of a city filled with thought and wonder. As Leonardo da Vinci settles more deeply into life in Milan, a rhythm begins to form, not one dictated by clocks or deadlines, but by curiosity, creation, and the quiet unfolding of ideas that have no urgency, only purpose. He spends his mornings walking through the city, letting the cool air fill his lungs, watching how light moves across the rooftops as the sun climbs higher. He notices the way shadows stretch long against stone walls, how dust dances in the morning glow, how people move with different energies depending on where they are going and why. There is something about this city that feels slower than Florence, not duller, not less alive, but simply more deliberate. Conversations unfold like slow-burning fires, meals last longer, music lingers in the air like perfume. It suits him well. At the ducal court, he finds himself surrounded by thinkers and artists who, like him, are given space to explore without interruption. There are poets who write quietly in corners, musicians who rehearse softly behind closed doors, architects who sketch grand plans for bridges and cathedrals that may one day rise from paper into reality. Leonardo does not rush to finish anything. He understands now that true creation takes time, not just time in the sense of hours and days, but time in the sense of patience, reflection, and allowing ideas to settle before shaping them into form. One of his most ambitious projects during this period comes not from a desire for fame, nor even from a commission, but from a quiet fascination, the idea of capturing a moment so perfectly that it seems to breathe. This idea becomes The Last Supper, a painting that will later be known around the world, not just for its artistic mastery, but for the way it captures humanity itself. He begins working on it inside the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria del Grazie, a place filled with stillness, where monks eat their meals and silence and prayers echo gently through stone halls. The wall he paints on is large, uneven in places, but he sees it not as an obstacle, but as an opportunity. Each morning, he arrives early, bringing with him brushes, pigments, and a quiet determination. He has studied the Bible's account of the final meal Jesus shares with his disciples, but he also draws from observation, from the way people speak, gesture, react to surprising news. He sketches each face carefully, giving each disciple a unique expression. One looks surprised, another doubtful, another angry, another sorrowful. These are not just religious figures, they are real people, caught in a moment of emotion that transcends centuries. He experiments with perspective, creating the illusion that the room extends beyond the wall, drawing the viewer into the scene as if they too were seated at the table. He uses soft transitions between light and shadow, a technique he calls sfumato, to give depth, realism, and a sense of movement to the figures. But the process is slow. Leonardo does not believe in rushing. He often steps back, sometimes for days, letting the paint dry, letting his thoughts settle, letting himself see what might need adjusting. He repaints hands, repositions heads, changes expressions, always searching for something truer, something deeper. Sometimes, he stands in silence for hours, simply watching the work take shape, letting the candlelight reveal new details he hadn't noticed before. Outside the convent, life continues. The Duke hosts elaborate feasts, where music fills the air and wine flows freely. Artists gather in salons to discuss philosophy and poetry. Engineers debate the best ways to build bridges, design aqueducts, improve irrigation systems. Leonardo listens to all of it, absorbing ideas like ink soaking into parchment. He writes notes in his notebooks, observations about sound waves, about the mechanics of musical instruments, about how laughter spreads like ripples in water when someone tells a joke. He designs theatrical sets for performances held in the palace, creating illusions of flying gods, disappearing spirits, and moving landscapes. He enjoys these projects because they allow him to blend art with science, imagination with engineering. He also continues his anatomical studies, though now with more access to resources. He speaks with physicians, visits hospitals, and occasionally gains permission to study human bodies after death. His drawings of muscles, bones, and organs become more detailed, more precise, not just scientific illustrations, but works of art in their own right. He writes, "To understand the body is to understand the soul." Every vein carries not just blood, but meaning. His notebooks grow heavier with knowledge. They contain sketches of machines that do not yet exist, devices for lifting heavy weights, for measuring distances, for automating tasks once done by hand. Some of these ideas will never be built in his lifetime, but he records them anyway, not for recognition, but because he believes that one day, someone else will find them useful. There are moments when he feels the weight of solitude, not loneliness, but the quiet awareness that few others share his level of curiosity. He does not seek companionship out of necessity, but he values the rare conversations where minds meet and spark ideas together. He walks often in the evenings, letting the cool night air clear his thoughts. He watches how moonlight falls across the rooftops, how stars blink slowly above the city, how the world seems to hold its breath in certain moments. And then, there are nights when he simply sits alone, surrounded by his books and sketches, listening to the distant chime of church bells. He closes his eyes, lets his fingers rest lightly on the pages of his notebook, and allows himself to feel gratitude, not for fame or fortune, but for the simple joy of learning, of creating, of understanding. Part 5, The Wandering Mind, Journeys Through Italy and the Search for Understanding. Now, my friend, we leave behind the quiet halls of Milan, where Leonardo da Vinci spent years immersed in art, science, and invention, and begin a new chapter in his life. This is a time not of grand commissions or elaborate courtly gatherings, but of movement, observation, and reflection. By the early 1500s, Leonardo begins to feel the familiar pull that has always guided him, not toward power or prestige, but toward knowledge, toward places where he can ask questions without interruption, where he can draw, study, and think freely. He leaves Milan behind, stepping once again into the world beyond palace walls. His path now takes him through different cities across Italy, each with its own rhythm, its own architecture, its own way of life. He moves slowly, never rushing, allowing himself to absorb everything around him as if filling another page in the great notebook of his mind. His first stop is Venice, a city unlike any other, built upon water, where gondolas glide silently through narrow canals and bridges arch gracefully over rippling currents. The air here smells of salt and stone, and the buildings seem to rise directly from the sea itself, as though they have grown there like coral. Leonardo walks through the streets with quiet curiosity, observing how the city functions, how trade flows through its ports, how engineers manage the delicate balance between land and water, how light dances across the surface of the canals at sunset. He sketches constantly, not just people and landscapes, but machines, too. He studies the designs of locks and canals, thinking about how water might be controlled more efficiently, how it could be used to power mills or irrigate fields. He writes notes in his familiar backward script, detailing ideas that may one day shape the future of engineering. Venice is filled with scholars and inventors, and Leonardo finds himself drawn to their conversations. He listens carefully, asks thoughtful questions, and sometimes shares his own observations, never boastfully, but always with the quiet confidence of someone who sees the world differently. Yet, despite the city's beauty and brilliance, he does not stay long. Something within him continues to call him forward, not toward escape, but toward discovery. So he travels south, passing through Bologna, where the red-tiled rooftops glow warmly in the afternoon sun. He visits libraries filled with ancient manuscripts, studying the works of Roman architects and Greek philosophers. He draws columns and arches, trying to understand the harmony hidden within their structures. In Bologna, he also returns to anatomy with renewed focus. Here, he gains access to dissection rooms where physicians study the human body in great detail. He watches carefully, sketching what he sees: muscles beneath skin, veins like rivers flowing through flesh, bones forming the quiet framework of life itself. He writes in his notebook, "The body is a machine, no less precise than those I design with my hands. To understand one is to understand them all." From Bologna, he makes his way to Florence once more, not as an apprentice this time, but as a man whose reputation has grown quietly but steadily. He reunites with old friends, meets new thinkers, and finds himself once again surrounded by artists and scholars who are shaping the Renaissance in their own ways. But even here, among familiar faces and streets he once walked as a young man, Leonardo feels restless. He is not searching for home, he already carries that within himself. Instead, he is searching for something else, deeper understanding, new perspectives, unexplored territories of thought. And so, he continues onward. He travels to Rome, the heart of the Catholic world, where the ruins of ancient civilizations stand beside grand cathedrals and bustling marketplaces. He wanders through the Colosseum, imagining the voices of the past echoing within its worn stones. He studies the aqueducts, marveling at how water was once carried for miles through carefully designed channels. Rome impresses him deeply, not only for its history but for the way it blends the sacred with the scientific. He speaks with architects who are designing new churches, engineers who are restoring old roads, and astronomers who chart the movements of stars. He spends time in the Vatican gardens, watching how plants grow in patterns dictated by sunlight and shadow. He sketches fountains, noting how water flows in spirals, how it catches the light before falling gently into pools below. He also experiments with perspective in his drawings, trying to capture depth not just in space, but in time, how a place changes with the seasons, how light shifts throughout the day, how people move differently depending on their moods. Each experience adds another layer to his understanding of the world. He does not seek to master everything, nor does he try to control the forces around him. Instead, he simply observes, records, and lets his thoughts settle like dust in the corners of an old library. As he moves through these cities, he continues to carry his notebooks with him, always close at hand, always filled with sketches, diagrams, and reflections. Some pages contain ideas for machines that do not yet exist, others hold detailed studies of birds in flight, and still others contain quiet musings on the nature of life itself. He writes, "To learn is to live." Each question answered leads to another waiting to be asked. There are no dramatic moments during this period of his life, no sudden discoveries, no public declarations of genius. Instead, there is only the steady unfolding of thought, the gentle accumulation of knowledge, the quiet satisfaction of understanding something just a little more clearly than before. And perhaps, dear listener, that is the most beautiful part of this journey, the realization that growth does not always come in loud bursts, but often in small, unnoticed steps. As Leonardo da Vinci continues his travels through Italy, the rhythm of movement becomes familiar, not tiring, but grounding. Each new city brings with it a different light, a different way of speaking, a different way of seeing the world. He does not rush from one place to the next. Instead, he allows himself time to breathe in each location, to let its spirit settle into his bones before moving on. From Rome, he makes his way northward once more, drawn back toward Milan by a quiet sense of purpose. Though he has spent years wandering, absorbing ideas like ink soaking into parchment, there is something about returning to a place where he once worked, where he once created, that feels right. Milan welcomes him as if it had been waiting. The streets feel familiar beneath his feet, the air carries the same crispness as before, and the ducal court still hums with the quiet energy of thought and invention. Yet, something within him has changed. He no longer sees the city merely as a place of opportunity or patronage. He sees it now as a space where ideas can be refined, where unfinished thoughts can be revisited and shaped into something more complete. He returns to his studio with a kind of gentle determination. His hands are older now, his mind fuller, and though he may not have all the answers, he knows which questions are worth asking again. One of the first things he does upon settling in is revisit his earlier sketches, pages filled with flying machines, water pumps, mechanical devices, and anatomical studies. He flips through them slowly, tracing lines with his fingers, reading notes written in his own careful hand years ago. Some ideas seem distant now, like dreams half remembered, while others feel closer than ever, just waiting for the right moment to take shape. He begins working again with engineers and architects, exchanging ideas about how buildings might better withstand earthquakes, how aqueducts could be improved to carry clean water more efficiently, how pulleys and gears might make labor easier for those who work the land. He spends long hours observing the movement of water, how it flows through channels, how it responds to pressure, how it creates spirals and whirlpools when disturbed. He sketches these patterns carefully, noting their similarities to the curling of hair, the twisting of vines, even the swirling of smoke rising from a candle. To him, everything is connected, the smallest leaf unfurling in springtime, the flight of a bird across the sky, the beating of a heart beneath skin. And so, he draws them all, not simply to capture their form, but to understand the forces that guide them. It is during this time that he begins to study the human face with renewed intensity. He sits quietly in public spaces, watching people speak, laugh, argue, listen. He notes how expressions shift subtly with emotion, how a raised eyebrow can suggest doubt, how a slight downturn of the lips can hint at sorrow. He sketches endlessly, not just portraits, but studies of eyes, mouths, hands, always searching for truth in the details. He believes that every expression holds a story, that every gesture reveals something deeper than words can say. And so, he paints again, not for commissions, not for recognition, but because painting is another way of asking questions. He begins work on what will later become The Virgin and Child with Saint and a piece that captures tenderness in motion, the way a mother gently guides her child's hand, the way love moves silently between generations. The brushstrokes are soft, the colors rich yet delicate, and the figures seem almost to breathe. There is no drama here, no grand declaration, only quiet intimacy, the kind that speaks to the heart without needing to shout. Outside the studio, Leonardo finds himself drawn to the natural world more than ever. He walks often through the countryside surrounding Milan, letting the wind cool his face, listening to the rustling of leaves in the trees. He watches birds glide effortlessly through the sky, studying the tilt of their wings, the way they ride the currents of air without struggle. He writes in his notebook, "Birds do not fight the wind, they use it. Perhaps we should learn from them." He sketches birds in flight, sometimes dozens on a single page, capturing the subtle differences in wing shape, and posture, and movement. He wonders if man might one day fly, not through force, but through understanding, by learning from nature rather than trying to conquer it. These thoughts lead him to design new kinds of flying machines, not rigid structures powered by levers and pulleys, but flexible ones inspired by the wings of bats and birds. He imagines a man lying flat, arms extended, wings shifting with the body's movements, guided not by strength, but by balance. He builds small models, testing how they catch the air, how they respond to changes in direction. He records his findings carefully, knowing that these ideas may never be realized in his lifetime, but believing that one day, someone else will find them useful. There are no failures in his eyes, only steps forward, even when they do not lead exactly where he expects. Leonardo also begins to write more deeply about the nature of observation itself. He believes that true knowledge comes not from books alone, nor from authority, but from direct experience, from watching, listening, feeling. He writes, "Experience does not err. It is the judge of all things, and it will never deceive us if we follow it with patience and care." This belief shapes everything he does, whether painting, inventing, or studying the human body. He does not accept ideas simply because they are popular or passed down through tradition. Instead, he tests them, questions them, and lets evidence guide his conclusions. And so, he continues his anatomical studies with renewed focus. He dissects bodies with great care, sketching muscles, nerves, and organs with increasing precision. He studies the heart, trying to understand how it pumps blood, how it beats without rest, how it sustains life. He writes, "The heart is not just a muscle, it is the center of sensation, the source of warmth, the engine of our being." His drawings are not just scientific illustrations, they are works of art, filled with reverence for the complexity of the human form. He sees beauty not just in faces or landscapes, but in the hidden architecture of the body itself. And yet, despite all he learns, he remains humble. He does not claim to know everything, nor does he seek to impress others with his discoveries. He simply keeps asking questions, knowing that understanding is a journey, not a destination. Part 6, the final chapter, A Quiet Life in France and the Last Years of Leonardo da Vinci. Now, my friend, we begin to walk with Leonardo da Vinci into the final chapter of his life, a time not of great commissions or public acclaim, but of quiet reflection, gentle companionship, and the peaceful unfolding of a mind that has spent a lifetime asking questions. By the year 1516, Italy no longer holds him as it once did. Though he has returned to Milan one last time, he finds himself restless again, drawn toward a place where he will be given not only space to think, but also the freedom to create without pressure. That place is France, a land of soft hills, winding rivers, and royal courts filled with both elegance and curiosity. He does not travel alone. Accompanying him are a few trusted assistants, including Francesco Melzi, a devoted student who will later become the keeper of Leonardo's notebooks after his death. There is also Salai, the boy who had entered Leonardo's life decades earlier and now walks beside him as a grown man, still full of mischief but tempered by time. Their journey begins in northern Italy, where they cross through quiet villages and bustling towns alike, moving slowly, never rushing. Leonardo watches the landscape change around him, from the golden fields of Lombardy to the deep green forests of France, where the air feels cooler, the light softer, and the rhythm of life more relaxed. When they arrive in France, Leonardo is welcomed warmly by King Francois, a ruler known for his love of art and learning. The king offers Leonardo the title of premier painter, architect et ingénieur du roi, which means something like first painter, architect, and engineer to the king. But unlike many court appointments that come with strict duties and expectations, this one is different. Leonardo is not asked to paint portraits or design grand palaces. Instead, he is simply offered peace, a small home at Clos-Luz, just a short walk from the king's palace in Amboise. This house becomes his sanctuary, a place where he can continue his studies, draw freely, and spend time with those he loves. The house itself is modest, built of stone and wood, with sloping roofs and small windows that let in just enough light. Inside, there are books stacked neatly on shelves, sketches pinned to walls, and notebooks scattered across tables. The air smells faintly of ink, parchment, and the earth outside. Each morning, Leonardo wakes slowly, allowing himself time to stretch, to breathe, to feel the cool air drifting through the open window. He dresses quietly, then steps outside to greet the day, sometimes walking through the garden behind the house, sometimes sitting beneath the shade of a tree, watching birds fly overhead. There is no rush here. No deadlines. No demands. Only the quiet hum of life continuing gently forward. He spends much of his time writing and drawing, revisiting old ideas and refining them. His hands, though older now, still move with precision across the page. He redraws flying machines, water pumps, and mechanical devices, not because he needs to build them, but because he enjoys thinking about them. He also continues his anatomical studies, though now with a different sense of purpose. He no longer sees the human body as something to be dissected and understood purely for scientific reasons. Instead, he sees it as part of a greater whole, connected to nature, to movement, to the unseen forces that guide all living things. He writes in his notebook, "To understand the body is to understand the soul." They are not separate, but one. His conversations with King Francois are often long and thoughtful. The king admires Leonardo deeply, not only for his genius but for his wisdom. Sometimes they speak about painting, sometimes about architecture, and sometimes about dreams, not the kind that come during sleep, but the ones that live in the mind, shaping the way we see the world. Francois encourages Leonardo to share his knowledge, to teach others what he has learned over a lifetime of observation and creation. And so, Leonardo begins to organize his notes, carefully arranging pages into subjects: anatomy, flight, mechanics, light and shadow, the movement of water. It is a slow process, done not out of obligation, but out of love. He wants these ideas to survive him, to be passed on to those who might one day find them useful. Though he no longer paints large canvases or creates grand murals, he still draws every day. His favorite subjects remain the same: the human form, the natural world, the subtle play of light and shadow. He sketches faces with gentle expressions, trees swaying in the wind, birds gliding effortlessly through the sky. Sometimes, he sits by the window and simply watches the world go by: children playing in the distance, farmers tending their fields, clouds drifting lazily across the blue expanse above. There is a quiet joy in these moments, not loud, not dramatic, but deep. He no longer seeks recognition or fame. He has lived long enough to know that true fulfillment comes not from applause, but from understanding, from creation, from the simple act of being present. His health begins to decline slowly, though he does not complain. He moves more carefully, rests more often, and sleeps longer. But even as his body weakens, his mind remains sharp, curious, alive. He continues to write until the very end. One evening, as the sun sets behind the hills of Amboise, casting a warm glow across the fields, Leonardo sits at his desk, dipping his quill into ink one last time. He looks out the window, watching how the light changes, how the shadows grow longer, how the world seems to settle into stillness. He smiles softly, not out of sadness, but out of peace. And then, as the night deepens and the stars begin to appear one by one in the darkening sky, he closes his eyes, gently, as if slipping into a dream. As the seasons pass quietly at Clos-Luz, Leonardo da Vinci begins to move more slowly, not out of reluctance, but as if he has finally found a rhythm that matches the natural world around him. He no longer hurries from one idea to the next, nor does he chase after answers with urgency. Instead, he allows his thoughts to settle like leaves falling gently to the ground. The garden behind his home becomes one of his favorite places. It is filled with herbs and flowers, their scents rising gently into the air with every breeze. He walks among them often, touching the petals of roses, brushing his fingers over the rough leaves of sage, watching how bees drift lazily from one bloom to another. He sketches these plants carefully, not just for beauty, but for understanding. He studies the way their roots stretch beneath the soil, how their leaves unfurl with the warmth of spring, how they respond to light and water. To him, each plant is a small universe of growth and change, teaching lessons about patience, adaptation, and quiet strength. Sometimes, he sits beneath the shade of an old tree, letting its branches filter the sunlight above him. He listens to the wind as it moves through the leaves, carrying with it the distant sound of laughter, the soft clatter of hooves on stone, the gentle murmur of conversation from those who live nearby. Though he is older now, his mind remains full of questions. He continues to write in his notebooks, though the pages are filled more with reflections than with new inventions. He writes about time, about memory, about how life seems to move in circles, beginning again even as it ends. He writes, "We do not truly leave this world. We remain in the things we create, in the minds we touch, and the questions we ask." King Francois visits often, sometimes walking through the garden with Leonardo, other times sitting beside him in the quiet of his study. Their conversations are long and unhurried, filled with ideas rather than commands. The king admires Leonardo not only for his genius, but for his wisdom, for the way he sees the world not as something to be conquered, but as something to be understood. One evening, as candlelight flickers softly against the stone walls of Clauselus, Francois asks Leonardo what he believes is most important in life. Leonardo pauses before answering, then says simply, curiosity and kindness. Without one, we stop learning. Without the other, we forget why we learn. The king nods thoughtfully, and they sit together in silence for a while, listening to the night settle around them. Leonardo also finds comfort in the presence of his companions, Francesco Melzi, who faithfully records his thoughts and organizes his notes, and Salai, whose sharp wit and stubborn nature have softened slightly with age. They care for him gently, not out of duty, but out of love. They speak often about the past, about Milan, about Florence, about the many cities Leonardo once walked through with a notebook tucked beneath his arm. But they do not dwell too long on what has already been. Instead, they focus on the present moment, on the quiet joy of being together. There are days when Leonardo feels tired, when he rests more than usual, when his hands tremble slightly as he holds his pen. But he never complains. He accepts the changes in his body with the same grace with which he once accepted the mysteries of the world. He spends more time looking at the sky now, watching how clouds gather and scatter, how stars appear one by one as the sun sets, how moonlight turns everything silver in the darkness. He writes, even the sky changes slowly. Nothing rushes. Not even the stars. His final drawings reflect this sense of peace. They are not grand or dramatic, but simple, a hand resting lightly on a table, a bird perched quietly on a branch, a child curled up in sleep. He captures not just form, but feeling, the stillness of a moment that will never come again. And so, my friend, as we continue walking gently through this final chapter of Leonardo's life, I invite you to breathe deeply, to let your thoughts drift like clouds across the sky, to feel the quiet rhythm of a man who lived fully until the very end. Part 7, The Quiet Echo, a Legacy That Lingers. Now, my friend, we come to the final part of this long and gentle journey, a time not for new beginnings, but for reflection, for remembrance, for allowing ourselves to sit quietly with all that has passed. Leonardo da Vinci is gone now, his body resting beneath the stone floor of St. Hubert Chapel in Amboise, France, but his presence lingers like the last note of a song still echoing through a quiet room. He did not leave behind riches or grand monuments built in his name, yet he left something far more lasting, a way of seeing the world that continues to inspire, to comfort, to awaken curiosity even centuries after his final breath. His notebooks, those pages filled with sketches, questions, dreams, and observations, remain among the most precious records of human thought ever created. They are not simply collections of drawings or scientific notes. They are windows into a mind that never stopped wondering, never stopped exploring, never stopped believing that every detail of life was worth noticing. Francesco Melzi, his devoted student, carefully preserved these notebooks after Leonardo's death, keeping them safe from time and decay. Though some pages were eventually lost, scattered across different libraries and private collections, many survived, waiting patiently for future generations to discover them, to study them, to be moved by them. And so, long after the candles in Clauselus had burned out, long after the ink on his final page had dried, Leonardo's thoughts continued to live on, in the hands of scholars who turned his pages with reverence, In the eyes of artists who saw the world differently because of him, and the minds of inventors who found ideas in his margins that would one day shape the future. One of the most beautiful things about Leonardo's legacy is how it unfolds gently, without force. It does not shout for attention, nor does it demand admiration. Instead, it invites, quietly, warmly, those willing to listen, to look closely, to ask questions without expecting immediate answers. His drawings of birds in flight inspired future studies of aerodynamics. His anatomical sketches helped medical students understand the human body in ways once thought impossible. His notes on light and shadow influenced painters for centuries to come. And though many of his machines were never built in his lifetime, their designs carried within them the seeds of inventions that would later change the world. But beyond science, beyond art, beyond engineering, what Leonardo truly gave to the world was a way of thinking. He showed us that knowledge is not something to be feared or hoarded, but something to be shared, explored, and questioned endlessly. He taught us that learning is not confined to books or classrooms, but exists in the simplest moments, watching rain fall, listening to wind move through trees, feeling the warmth of sunlight on skin. He believed that no subject stood alone, that art and science, nature and invention, beauty and function were all connected. To draw a flower was to understand growth. To paint a face was to study emotion. To sketch a machine was to imagine possibility. And perhaps most importantly, he reminded us that wonder is not only for the young, it is for anyone willing to see the world with open eyes and an open heart. In the centuries that followed his passing, his works were studied, copied, admired, and sometimes misunderstood. Some tried to place him neatly into categories: painter, scientist, engineer, but he resisted such labels, just as he had in life. He was, and remains, all of these things at once, and more. The Mona Lisa, painted years before his final journey to France, became one of the most recognized images in the world. Yet its power lies not in its fame, but in the quiet mystery it holds, in the soft curve of a smile that seems to shift with each glance, and the depth of expression that speaks not only to the past, but to the present. The Last Supper, though worn by time and restoration, still captures the moment when everything changes, not with drama or spectacle, but with a single sentence that sends ripples through the lives of those seated at the table. It reminds us that history is made not only by great events, but by small ones, by conversations, by choices, by the way we look at one another in moments of truth. And then there is the Vitruvian Man, a drawing that seems simple at first glance, yet carries within it a profound idea, that the human body reflects the harmony of the universe itself. It is not just a study of anatomy, but a meditation on balance, proportion, and the quiet beauty of being alive. These works, along with countless others, continue to speak to us, not loudly, but clearly, reminding us that genius does not always arrive with fanfare, but often in the form of patience, observation, and kindness. So, my friend, as we walk together through this final part of Leonardo's story, I invite you to take a deep breath, to let yourself rest in the quiet space between words, to allow your thoughts to drift gently like leaves falling from a tree. Because even though this chapter is ending, the echoes of Leonardo's life will continue, and the way we look at the world, and the questions we ask, and the way we find beauty in the smallest details. If sleep begins to pull at your eyelids now, then go gently. Carry with you the soft glow of candlelight, the hush of footsteps on stone floors, the steady scratch of charcoal on paper as a man sits alone, thinking deeply about the world. As time moves forward, gently carrying us further from the life of Leonardo da Vinci, his presence becomes less like a footprint in the sand and more like the hush of wind through trees, still there, still felt, even if unseen. His notebooks, once filled with hurried sketches and careful notes, now rest in museums, libraries, and private collections around the world. Some are displayed behind glass, where visitors lean in to read the backward script, trying to catch a glimpse of the mind that wrote them. Others remain tucked away in quiet rooms, waiting patiently for someone curious enough to turn their pages. And yet, even when they are not on display, even when they are not being studied by scholars or admired by artists, Leonardo's thoughts continue to live, not just in ink and paper, but in the way people see the world. A child watching birds fly may wonder how they stay in the air, just as Leonardo once did. A painter studying light may notice how it falls across a face, how it shifts with the time of day, how it tells a story without words. An engineer designing a machine may pause to ask, what would Leonardo do? His questions, once written quietly in candlelit rooms, now echo through classrooms, laboratories, and studios across the world. They are not loud questions, demanding attention, but gentle ones, inviting us to look closer, to think deeper, to feel more fully. One of the most remarkable things about Leonardo is that he never stopped learning. Even in his final years, when others might have rested on past accomplishments, he was still sketching, still writing, still asking, why, and how, and what if. He did not seek recognition, nor did he chase fame. He simply wanted to understand, to know the shape of a bird's wing, the movement of water, the expression in a human eye. And in doing so, he gave the world something far greater than inventions or paintings. He gave us permission to be curious. Because of him, we know that knowledge does not belong only to experts or institutions. It belongs to anyone willing to observe, to question, to wonder. It belongs to you, to me, to every person who has ever looked at the sky and thought, there is something beautiful here. His legacy is not built of stone or gold, but of thought, of lines drawn in charcoal, of words written in ink, of ideas that continue to grow long after the hand that first imagined them is gone. In some ways, Leonardo was ahead of his time, thinking about flight centuries before airplanes existed, drawing machines that would one day become reality, imagining a world where art and science were not separate, but deeply connected. But in other ways, he was perfectly in tune with his era, living during a time when the world was opening up, when new ideas were flowing freely, when curiosity was beginning to be seen not as dangerous, but as essential. The Renaissance, the age in which he lived, was a time of rebirth, of knowledge, of creativity, of exploration. And Leonardo, in his own quiet way, helped shape that age more than he ever realized. He did not shout his discoveries from rooftops. He did not write books filled with rules or theories meant to be followed without question. Instead, he offered possibilities, gentle suggestions, thoughtful observations, drawings that whispered, "Look here. This is interesting. What do you think?" And perhaps that is why his work continues to feel so alive, because it invites participation. It does not tell us what to believe, but asks us to see for ourselves. It does not give us all the answers, but reminds us that the act of questioning itself is a kind of beauty. Even now, in a world filled with screens and noise, with information moving faster than ever before, Leonardo's way of thinking feels like a refuge, a reminder that depth is still valuable, that slowness can be a strength, that patience is not wasted when it leads to understanding. You do not need to visit a museum to feel his influence. You do not need to study engineering or painting to be touched by his ideas. All you need is a moment of stillness, a willingness to notice, a readiness to wonder. Dear friend, as we reach the end of this quiet journey through the life of Leonardo da Vinci, I want to thank you for walking beside me, for listening, for imagining, for allowing yourself to be carried gently through time by the rhythm of a story told in soft tones and steady breaths. Leonardo's life was not one of loud proclamations or grand gestures. It was a life lived with curiosity, with care, with the kind of quiet wonder that does not demand attention, but invites it. He did not seek fame, nor did he chase certainty. He simply asked questions, followed his thoughts wherever they led, and found beauty in the smallest details of the world around him. And perhaps that is what we can carry with us now, the reminder that learning is not always loud, that growth does not always come quickly, and that peace can often be found in the simple act of paying attention. If you are still awake, I hope you feel a little more at ease than when we began. If you have already drifted into sleep, then I hope the story wrapped around you like a warm blanket, guiding your dreams toward gentle places. Either way, I am grateful you were here. This has been the entire life of Leonardo da Vinci, a bedtime story not just about a man, but about the way he saw the world, about how he moved through it with grace, patience, and endless curiosity. If you enjoyed this journey, if it brought you even a moment of calm, please do like this video and subscribe to Bedtime Historia, so we can gather again under the quiet light of history, night after night. And if you'd like, leave a comment below saying where you are right now, and what time it is in your part of the world, just a small note to remind us that though we may be far apart, we shared this moment together. Now, my friend, wherever you are, and whatever tomorrow holds for you, I wish you deep rest, peaceful dreams, and a return to this place whenever you need to slow down, breathe deeply, and remember the quiet beauty of a life well lived.